is up, guys? Frosty0232 here today for another Frosty Features. Today, we have the final member of our Extreme X-Men team that we are going to do a feature on. Brand new coming to the game, we have Sunspot. So, for those of you who haven't been here before, what this is a comic book background on the tunes that you use in Marvel Strike Force, and I am your guide to the stars. Got it? Because it's Sunspot, you know, the sun's a star. Ha! Let's go. According to Scopely, Roberto da Costa was a teenager when his mutant ability manifested. Like 98% of mutants, it's fine. While playing in a soccer game, he discovered that he had the power to absorb sunlight and convert it into superhuman strength and energy blasts. With his newfound ability, Sunspot was recruited to join the New Mutants, X-Men, and X-Force to name a few, and fought against the likes of the Hellfire Club and even the Skrulls during Secret Invasion. We will rate. This is the description of Sunspot from MarvelStrikeForce.com's blog post. We will rate that at the end of the feature. So, here is the man of the hour, the guy, the fiery man. That's Sunspot. Name, Roberto da Costa. First appearance, Marvel graphic number 4, 1982. This is when we start seeing the New Mutants kind of coming out of the woodworks. So they're all sort of in this, they're all introduced in this sort of like area in this like group of comics. So there he is, the man of, I already said that. Powers and abilities. Okay. So, Sunspot's powers are complicated, right? At face value, Sunspot sort of comes off, especially if you've seen X-Men Days of Future Past, he kind of comes off as another fire user, and he is, but he's not, right? So the way I've described it, he is superhuman in every way. He's got super speed to an extent. He past human peak abilities, especially in strength. His original powers, his power set has changed and continues to change very often. But originally, what it was that he could absorb solar radiation and use that for super strength. He could not do concussive blasts right away. He couldn't fly right away. Pretty much what he could do at first was be very strong. And because of his absorption, as the things move on later, and he finds out that he absorbs more than solar radiation, he also absorbs light waves and things like that. So when in absorbing these things, his body is not reflecting any color, therefore he turns into this pitch black figure. So powers of superhuman, solar/photo absorption. So he absorbs. That's what I kind of just said. Solar radiation and light, and light itself. And then also, depending on who's riding Sunspot, he has all three: helio, photo, and pyrokinesis. So he can control fire, he can control light, and he can control solar radiation, right? So this manifests itself in many different ways, but ultimately, he's very strong, he's very hot, and he's very dark. Aliases. So he's actually got quite a few aliases. So one of the main ones I'm going to be talking about or using is a lot of his friends call him Bobby. His name being Roberto, but yes, so a lot of his friends call him Bobby. He also, in the Hellfire Club, takes the position of both the Black King and the Black Rook, and he also goes by Citizen V when he's doing, he's leading the US Avengers for a bit, and then when that fails, he rebrands himself as Citizen X, and then the very next comic he shows up in, he is Sunspot again, so there's that. And then Rainfire is, it's actually not an alias that he goes by, but there is like a clone, like a genetic clone of him that goes by Rainfire. So he's often mistaken for Rainfire. So I felt the need to kind of incorporate, that. Oh, affiliations. Sunspot's quite affiliated, so I only put in a couple. Very notably, New Mutants, right off the bat is where he kind of ends up. Then we have him in the X-Men, of course, and the Avengers. So All of the above. Somebody in chat said, what about when he's running AIM? Also AIM, and a few other things. I think I'll talk about him running AIM here in a little bit. Background, he is Afro-Brazilian. His father is Afro-Brazilian, and then his mother is Brazilian. And he is from Rio de Janeiro, and we find him, he is discovered by Professor X in Brazil. Who died? Because you can't be a superhero or supervillain without somebody dying. And in this case, it was Bobby's girlfriend, Juliana. With that, one of the big lessons that Bobby needs to pull is that he needs to stop playing soccer. So, starting off, the way that Bobby's powers manifest, mutants, when they become a teenager, their powers typically will show up in a stressful situation. And there's a situation where Bobby gets into it with another soccer player during a championship game, and things get pretty tense. And he goes, so Bobby has a temper problem that he deals with through a lot of the comics. He gets it once you get kind of to the Jonathan Hickman era, you find him kind of becoming a little bit more zen. But anyway, so he tackles this rival player, Keller, and they start getting into a fight. And then in the middle of the fight, his powers manifest, and he turns black, and he punches Keller, and he goes flying away because he has super strength. And this event is noticed by somebody in the Hellfire Club named Donald Pierce, and Donald Pierce is this just really fun guy who wants to kill all mutants. And he's like, oh well, there's a mutant I just happened to be watching when he became a mutant, so I'm gonna send some mercenaries. I'm gonna hire some people to send them over there and kidnap him so that I can kill him, because I want to kill all mutants. And in doing so, Sunspot's able to take out all the mercs, because Professor X also witnesses this, because everybody's just watching random soccer games of kids in Brazil all the time, especially if you have mutant powers or high tech like our white bishop Donald Pierce has. So anyway, they send the mercs, and Professor X is like, yo, I'm going to send some X-Men and you're going to help. And so they get out there, and as it goes on, we find that, and this is actually a weakness of Sunspot's, up to a point, he doesn't really do it so much anymore, but he can become overexhausted and use his power too much. He runs out of the solar radiation that he has absorbed, and he essentially becomes effectively regularly human. This happens in the fight, and a merc points his gun at him, and he shoots, and Juliana jumps in front of the bullet and dies, right? So our who died goes into the stop playing soccer. I say stop playing soccer because as we go on, after this moment, Professor X is no longer doing the X-Men at this time. He's not doing the X-Men, he's doing the New Mutants, and he is invited to join the New Mutants and learn under Xavier how to control his powers. He accepts, and in the New Mutants, he runs into this new guy, Cannonball. And so in Cannonball, this becomes Sunspot's rival heavily. It very much feels like a Wolverine-Cyclops relationship. There's a lot of love, a lot of hate, but they are best friends. And as the relationship kind of goes on, you do see them actually hanging out a lot more than Wolverine and Cyclops. So maybe it's slightly less toxic, because Cyclops is just sort of a toxic dude. So maybe that's the big difference. Cannonball's not quite as bad. But anyway, so in a soccer match that Sunspot plays against Cannonball, he accidentally, he heavily injures Cannonball, which leads Sunspot ultimately to leave the New Mutants for a time. So every time he plays soccer in the comics, something bad happens. So he needs to just stop playing soccer 100%. And and then with that Cannonball, a lot of the time when you see Sunspot kind of appear, you see Cannonball show up. And actually, when this is just a fun Frosty tidbit, when the silhouettes were shown for the Extreme X-Men, I thought Sunspot was Cannonball, which is pretty funny. So, because I think the model they used for Sunspot's a little weird. He's a lot larger than I'm used to seeing him, and then the way his hair is set up, the way it read to me, and then how it showed him kind of like this, I thought it was Cannonball. So it was when I saw it was Sunspot, I thought that was super funny. Moving on, relationships. Emmanuel and Nina DaCosta are his parents. Josiah Guthrie is his godson. This is Cannonball's son. And Juliana Sandoval is his former girlfriend, the one we were talking about where she dies, right? And we'll talk about her a little bit more in our notable events. So, really to start off, we've already hit on it a little bit, but the Hellfire Club comes up a lot when it comes down to Sunspot. The Hellfire Club is brought up multiple times. So what the Hellfire Club is, for those of you in the back, we have a lot of Hellfire Club members in Marvel Strike Force, but we don't have a tag or anything like that. The Hellfire Club essentially is a club that is put together of the extremely powerful, the wealthy elite, essentially, and it is a club in which the wealthy elite does what the wealthy elite wants to do to get more wealth and become more elite, right? And they take on the names of chess pieces. So earlier, I talked about how we see for aliases, we talk about the Black King and the Black Rook that Sunspot takes on. He does take those on. Originally, so his first interaction is the one we just talked about with Donald Pierce. Donald Pierce is a white bishop at the time of Bobby kind of manifesting his powers, and then directly after Juliana's death and Bobby joining the New Mutants, his father, Emmanuel, who we just brought up for the first time, Emmanuel DaCosta, very, very rich man, is invited to become part of the, he's invited to become part of the Hellfire Club, and he takes on the alias of White Rook, but I think it's only really for effect. He ends up dying eventually, and Bobby inherits all of his money and stuff like that. But so he becomes a White Rook, but nothing he does as a Hellfire Club member is like matters, more or less. Apparently he's just very unnoticed within the thing. Ultimately, when we see Bobby gets kind of pulled into the Hellfire Club, it was sort of a plot device to be like, oh yeah, your dad was in this. So his dad was the White Rook, and then Selene, who we kind of see there dressed in black, she's essentially a Morgan Le Fay type, for those of you who aren't aware of her, but she's from like Roman times, but she's a sorceress. She's the Black Queen at a point, and there's a situation where deviants are attacking this Damascus program situation thingy-majig, and she's like, we need to have this stopped. So she's like, hey, Sunspot, no strings attached, you should come fight these guys for me. And he's like, okay. And then X-Force shows up. New Mutants turns into X-Force. We talked about that recently. So he knows other people. He joins up with X-Force, and they take this out. And then Selene's like, man, that dude's pretty freaking cool. And she goes to the Black King, who at the time was freaking Blackheart, right? You want to talk about characters not in MSF? I don't really care about Selene, but Blackheart, right? Son of Mephisto. So anyway, she's like, hey, Blackheart, this dude's pretty cool. What can we do to make sure that he joins us, right? His dad was part of us, but he needs to be part of us. He's quite goody two-shoes, and Blackheart's like, well, how about I tell him his girlfriend wasn't supposed to die, and ultimately, if he joins us, I'll bring his girlfriend back to life. So with that, he comes to they go to Bobby, and Bobby, he's just like, hey, here's the deal. If you become our Black Rook, and if you become our Black Rook, I will bring back Juliana. And Bobby's like, oh man, like, how can I say no to that? She gave her life for me, so why wouldn't I, put my life on the line, whatever, for her? So he becomes a Black Rook, and then Blackheart's like, here's the catch, though. Like, I wasn't lying, but here's the catch. So he brings back Juliana in a different body that's comatose, right? So it's Juliana's spirit in somebody who just died, but they're in like a coma. So now Juliana's spirit is in this new body, and because of this, Bobby is super like mortified, whatever, and he's still kind of operating within the Hellfire Club, and you see him leave and come back multiple times. But eventually she regains consciousness, and he's brought her back, but he's got too much grief and guilt about her death that he doesn't want to associate with her. So there's a situation where she's awake, and he like bumps into her, and then she's like, oh, don't I recognize you? And then he's like, no, I'm sorry, and he leaves, and that's the last time you see him talk to Juliana, and it's super freaking sad. But with that, that's when we first see him kind of move away from the Hellfire Club, but things do kind of happen, and there's a situation where as he's the Black Rook, Sebastian Shaw gets horribly injured, and Bobby ends up stepping up into the role of the Black King. So we do see Bobby take control of the Hellfire Club. So that's another thing I wanted to point out about Sunspot, is that he's a side character until he's not. And he runs into this situation, and somebody brought it up in chat earlier and I said it. He runs into these situations where he ends up kind of driving very large organizations all of a sudden. So yes, he inherits his dad's wealth, which kind of gives him that driving force. Eventually he buys AIM and he runs AIM from that. So effectively turning AIM, he kicks Scientist Supreme out, and he becomes essentially, or he kind of converts AIM to being good for a short period of time. But anyway, yes, so he ends up driving not only AIM, he also drives the Hellfire Club for a certain period of time, which is just kind of wild to think about. And he also, and this actually kind of segues into the next notable event. Sunspot also has a problem where he has powers, they change. There's a situation, so he starts off, he's pretty much just super strength. He has a situation where he goes off with his friend Gideon. Gideon experiments on him, and his powers change, and that's how he gets flight and concussive blasts, and whatever. But then the next comic, he'll come back, and he might not be able to fly anymore. He might not have the concussive blasts. He might have reverted. And when we see him come into the War of the Realms, which is the next one we are going to talk about, when we see him come into the War of the Realms, we have another situation. He loses his powers, and this is when we have that Citizen V, Citizen X thing at the end of US Avengers. Check it out. It's only 12 issues long. We see him, he has essentially the most baselineiest of his powers that he gets, and then he comes back and he just magically has all his powers again, never explained. So that actually happens to Sunspot a lot. He shows up and he may or may not have his powers, and they may be stronger, they may be weaker, and he's extremely, extremely inconsistent throughout the Marvel Universe. In War of the Realms, what this is, Malekith, the Dark Elf, for those of you who love Thor the Dark World, Malekith is taking over all 10 realms, and only Midgard is standing, and he decides to invade, and it becomes this very big situation, very interesting. Sunspot has some pretty substantial things going on at the time, so I wanted to talk about it. So War of the Realms, super cool, definitely check it out. Sunspot's not necessarily a main point, but here's the cool thing about it, or interesting thing about it. So Sunspot and some of the other X-members, Multiple Man, Wolfsbane, people like that, they are evacuating people from the city to City Field, which is like a baseball, it's a baseball stadium, or was a baseball stadium, I don't know if it still is, but they're evacuating people into there, while Malekith is there's a bunch of people have allied with Malekith, and so this includes, so he's essentially sending things like frost giants and stuff to attack. And in this situation, they're evacuating, and frost giants attack, and Wolfsbane, him and Multiple Man take on the frost giants. And and Hope Summers is there. So another really important character in Marvel lore is Hope Summers, potentially one of the most important characters. And she can copy other people's skills or whatever. And there's a point where they're trying to capture one of the frost giants for information, and Sunspot sees Hope Summers dead on the ground, and he's like, pretty mad about that. And so he picks up a car and he kills the final remaining frost giant, and Wolfsbane's like, bro, why'd you do that? And then he realized, it hits his brain that she copied Multiple Man's powers, and he saw a dead dupe on the ground. So she wasn't actually dead, and he just lost his crap and killed the frost giant. So with that, they try to go back to resume their duties, and they are attacked by Sabretooth, who has aligned himself with Malekith, and some ice wolves. So this is where Sabretooth's this really fun dude, because he kind of swings back and forth from being sort of this baseline villain to being just this really ridiculously brutal situation in War of the Realms. Sabretooth really shines as far as being a bloody mess and horrible person. So he shows up with the Ice Wolves, and Wolfsbane's like, I've got Sabretooth, and then they go off and fight. So Sunspot's like, all right, I'm gonna kill some Ice Wolves. And so they fight, and at the end of the fight, it becomes some other X people show up. So we have, like, if I remember correctly, it's like Karma, or no, it's Mirage and Havoc. And so they show up and they kind of lay down some cover fire, more or less. And Sabretooth's like, F this noise, and he runs away. And then they're like, oh man, Wolfsbane's gone. She's gone. What's going on? And then also somebody's like, oh, do you have magic with you? Like, Havoc's like, oh, where's magic? And Sunspot's like, oh, we don't have magic. We thought you had magic. And magic's gone. Liliana Rasputin in the game, you know, demon child. So we have the two people missing, and so they're like, what the heck's going on? We got to check on the civilians anyway. They go back, and Sabretooth is doing a second attack, and we find out that Sabretooth snuck up on Magic and kidnapped her and used a gem of power to stop Magic's powers from working. So the main reason why I want to bring that up is what happens with this gem. So Sunspot sees this, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go save Magic. And he flies in and he snatches the gem, and Magic's like, no, don't, because Magic knows how magic things work, obviously. And so she's like, yeah, don't do this. And Sunspot uses his solar radiation, and he cracks the gem and bursts it in his hand. He's like, oh, and that's what this panel is. Oh, it's not that bad. And then immediately after, he blows up and dies. Right? So him destroying the thing blows up this, it kills him as well. So he dies, Sunspot's dead, and Magic gets her power back, and Magic is pissed. And so, due to a lot of the brutality and atrocities that Sabretooth has been doing, etc., she goes up to Sabretooth and she summons her freaking sword, and she chops his head off, and she's like, yeah, and I'm not a big fan of your healing factor, so dimensional portal. Throws head into dimensional portal and separates the body from the head in two different dimensions. And she's like, and I don't think I'll be seeing you again soon. Of course, that does happen all the time. So he does eventually come back, but just a cool, brutal thing that Magic does because of Sunspot's death. Sunspot, as soon as Krakoa becomes a thing and they start reviving people, Sunspot is among the first of the mutants to be brought back to life. So we got Sunspot back then, and this is the run where Sunspot's actually he's showing his true colors and true powers at this point when we see him come back. So, and power level. Marvel Strike Force doesn't care much for power levels, but here in Frosty Features, we do. Now, the way that this works, if you are a multiversal threat, you are a threat to not just your reality, but all realities at the same time. You can topple the multiverse at whim. Universal means you're a threat to your reality, perhaps can hop over to another one and end that one. Cosmic means on a small end, you are a threat on a planetary scale. You can destroy planetary bodies, and with enough time, you could probably take out something like a solar system or a small galaxy. Nuclear means that you have power equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb, which means you can level things like small cities all the way up to a planetary body. Super Soldier means that you are beyond all human capabilities in every way. Super strength, super speed, super reflexes, etc. Our staple here is Captain America. City means that you are a human being trained to the absolute and utter peak of human abilities. In Marvel, we see a lot of our mercenaries, secret agents, and things like that at the city level. And then there's Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that Hela spawns in Marvel Strike Force, and all on his own, with his little lonesome, he's really not that tough to deal with. So due to undead Asgardian physiology, just because I like the argument, I equate Greg to a regular human level. Therefore, if I have 3 sandwich bags full of assorted hot sauces and a lot of aggression, I theoretically could take out Greg in a fight. Frosty versus Greg. It is what it is. So, Greg is our lowest rank. Greg is equivalent to that of a regular human being. So, with Sunspot's powers are heavily underutilized until, like I said, until more recently, the last, as of this recording date, the last 4 years, he's really kind of shown back up as far as being powerful, but he's very hit and miss. He'll show up without as many powers, he'll show up with more powers, but with his actual powers taken into consideration, pyrokinesis, photokinesis, and heliokinesis, he firmly cements himself at a cosmic rating. He has the ability to take out large areas, and his potential is quite high. Potential being that being he has the potential to be one of the strongest mutants there is in the event that he's correctly utilized. Especially with him kind of focusing in and like making his powers a little bit more. Ultimately, there's a whole arc where he's like reining in his temper and focusing on developing his powers, and he becomes quite like they end up using him as a lone defender of on Mars and things like that. So he is quite powerful and has a lot of potential. We don't see cosmic level Sunspot often enough, but he can and is there. As for according to Scopely, they really didn't even try. That's just been a fun theme for the Extreme X-Men. They really didn't put that much into it. They even talk about how when his powers manifest, that he has, you can see it right behind his face right there, he has Energy Blast. He doesn't get that until way after his powers manifest, and he has that situation with Gideon I talked about earlier. So I'm not even sure why they kind of put those things together. I think they were just trying to shoehorn it in and make it as short as possible, which creates errors in your continuity, right? So yes, that's what it is. They didn't try to research it whatsoever. Sorry, didn't even try. And so that was Frosty features Sunspot. I hope that you all had a good time. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube. It helps the channel a lot, and it doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks. As a reminder, I stream every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time at the link above. We do Frosty features live. I hope that you all had a good time. Please let me know in the comments your favorite Sunspot moments or anything I might have missed that you love. And I hope that you all have a fantastic weekend. Most importantly, y'all, stay cool.